Thank you all so much, and thank you for your patience. I would like to start by acknowledging that I am privileged to live and work on the unceded territories of the Kwikwetlem Nations, which lies within the unceded territories of the Tsleil-Waututh, Ketsi, Musqueam, Kikite, Squamish, and Stoyo nations. What a privilege it is for us to meet today, talking about Africa Day. But before we go there, I really would like for us to acknowledge the fact that it is also the anniversary of the death of George Floyd, which, it brings mixed feelings all around. And not to mention that we are in the middle of a pandemic too. So I'd like to start by saying thank you for organizing this event, and very thankful that the Africa OAU happened when it happened. Of course, Africa still has its struggles, but we have come a long way, and we continue to do the best that we can as a nation. Better yet, how important is it for us to celebrate the African Canadian women whose history goes a long, long, long way? I'm going to take us back first to a 2018 Harvard Business Review publication, which was called Beating the Odds, which focused on answering one question: what does it take to succeed as a Black woman? That was the question that they went out to ask executives that were in Fortune 500 companies. The research results can be reduced to one word that came out of all the answers, and that one word was resilience. You're probably thinking that resilience is such a common word that it applies across the board to everyone, because everyone struggles. Yeah, we know that. But in this case, it plays a role that is so huge because Black women have gone through so much over the years. It also, you can go back to years ago and realize that they started off as a family unit. They started off with a different structure of family and had to come into Canada to adapt to a new system that was loaded with its own challenges. The Harvard research found out that the difference between resilience in the general population and the resilience in Black women was that the Black women relied heavily on the resilience more than any other subset of the population. And this was due to the frequency in which they encountered obstacles. They had setbacks and how they had so many dynamics that were intersectional and were coming, bringing in the complexities into their lives. In each case, however, the research showed that they bounced back, they refused to get distracted or derailed, they maintained forward progress. And one participant actually shared, I quote, "We were all told that you had to be smarter, run faster, jump higher, or be better than anybody else around you just to stay in the game. I certainly wasn't raised in Canada or in the US, but I was also told the very same advice. We are asked by the communities and by the people around us to always be better than everybody else." Back to the Harvard study. The women who were studied developed 3 key skills and those 3 skills contributed to the resilience. One was emotional intelligence. The second one was authenticity. And the third one was agility. These skills can help propel anyone's career. All professionals and organizations in which people work can benefit from cultivating and leveraging emotional intelligence, authenticity, and agility. And these are also very key characteristics that can be attributed to the Black women in Canada, as I mentioned earlier. You can look in history and you see Jean Augustin, Viola Desmond, Rosemary Brown, Mary Ann Shadd, Anne Cruz, Carrie Best, Harriet Tubman, and the list goes on and on. It's amazing that when our honorable was sharing his names, he actually had totally different names than I had, which shows you that we've got such a rich and long list of Canadian women that have gone before us and that have set such a successful precedent for us. The first recorded Black person arrived in Canada in 1608. Can you believe it? 1608. More would continue to come in the 17th and 18th century. And the key thing to note with all these people that were coming was that the extended familism was a permanent feature of life in Africa. So in Africa, if you look even today, the community includes the political aspect, the economic, the cultural dynamics, and it's more like, the extended basic family unit. So when you come into the West, all that changed. And women had to be the head, had to hold on the fort while they were facing so many challenges. Not to mention that they were dehumanized, they were seen as domestic agents, they were seen as unintellectuals, they were seen as agencies of basic labor. Despite their intelligence, always they had to keep the basic labor jobs. Their resilience was tested over and over and over. In her essay, Linda Carty writes, given the terms under which women of African descent in Canada first arrived in this country as slaves and later as escaped slaves or newly freed women from the American South, they have long understood that they've been assigned just about the lowest status of any group in Canada at the time. Historically, these women have not had easy access to state services such as education and welfare, and have a long and documented history of working outside of the home for wages. The legacy of this combined history has played a key role in defining who they are. So if you see, she wrote this many years ago, and it said historically, as if it was ending. Fast forward to today, we are going through the pandemic, and which subset of the population is affected the most? It is still the visible minorities, simply because they are still over-indexing on the lower jobs, on the labor jobs. So the story has not changed up until now. So despite their hard work, African Canadian women have been rendered invisible. Many of their experiences have been made to just disappear into thin air, or they're simply systemically erased. In her 1992 book called Feminism and the Question of Postmodernism, Judith Butler wrote, once it is understood that subjects are formed through exclusionary operations, it becomes politically necessary to trace the operations of that construction and erasure. Today, many people are calling for Black history to be shared in schools. They are calling for Black history to be shared all around, because Black history is Canadian history. Black women's history is Canadian history. However we find ourselves, even with all these trailblazers that have gone before us, we are still fighting to be heard and fighting to make sure that that erasure doesn't continue. As we know, the media chooses what is attractive, and they choose what they think their audience want to hear. And if you look at history and data, it shows that media gatekeepers constantly are not interested in Black women's stories. They're not, when we are doing well, it doesn't get shared. When we are doing bad, that's when it gets shared. Look at the stats that they share on how Black women over-index in jails, because that's what they think people want to hear. And that's the narrative that is being told. It is up to us to bridge that gap in history. I'm actually super proud of my city, Coquitlam, because in 3.5 years ago, they called me for an interview, and the historian then proceeded to tell me that up until then, they had no history that any Black person has ever lived in Coquitlam. And I was shocked. You have many families that have lived in Coquitlam for decades, but they were not documented anywhere in the Coquitlam Heritage Society books. But I'm proud of them because this year, for the first time, they're going to have an event in the fall called We Have Always Been Here. And what they have done is they're interviewing Black women, Black men, families about who they are and who they represent here in Coquitlam. They're even collecting recipes. And these are going to go on to be the history that we are talking about here. This is going to be the information and the narrative that will be told going forward, rather than us always waiting to have somebody else telling the narrative. Earlier this year, I was asked to watch and review a 1991 documentary called Sisters in the Struggle. I hope that's not the one that you're showing tonight, is it? Is it the one? I cannot hear Dr. Adade. But anyway, I'll share what I have.
No, sorry. We're not showing that one. Yeah. Okay.
Okay, wonderful. Because I was going, wouldn't it be a coincidence if you're showing the same documentary? So 1991, this documentary called Sisters in the Struggle was shown, and it revealed an angry detail of how Black women resist the hegemonic discrimination that is institutionalized by government and by policy. The featured women were active in their communities. They were, community organizers. They were politicians. They were labor and feminist organizers. They shared their insights and personal testimonies on a legacy of racism and sexism, on a legacy that always pushed them down rather than lift them up. I highly recommend, if people have not watched that documentary, to watch it, because it truly shows some of the struggles that the people that have come before us have gone through. The analysis they present links their struggles with the ongoing battle against racism and systemic violence against women and people of color. 20 years later, and we are still talking about the same thing. And we are still talking and asking for the change because it's still not done. I'm going to go on to just talk a little bit about the stats that just came a couple of weeks ago. Some of you might have seen that. Statistics Canada just published that women are still earning 56% to the dollar of what a man earns, and visible minority women earn 32% of what non-visible minority women earn. So we are still at the bottom of the totem pole, right? These findings, were the same as what Globe and Mail actually did their own research, and it was a 2-year research where they were collecting data to try to get to the bottom of it, and they came up with the same results. And the most disturbing result was that only 3% of racialized women were in the higher positions. Even when we're talking about the power gap, it shows because we are totally not represented when it comes to the higher groups. And with all this, I want you to keep in mind all the work that has gone through, that the women before us have done, the trailblazers, the work that they have put into, and yet we seem to be moving just an inch at a time. In public sector workplaces across Canada, men and women are separated not more than just by salary, but women and racialized people can't break through to the highest level of decision-making tables. We are not sitting there where it matters. We keep facing that concrete ceiling. So I call on us today, whether you are a male or a female, for us to really make sure that we lift Black women up so that we can break this trend that has stayed for so many years and that need to be reversed. And for the Black women that are on this event that I saw, I've got a challenge for you. My challenge for you is to be bold enough to celebrate your strengths and your resilience, to be generous to yourself by acknowledging the steps you have taken thus far, to be wise enough to cut the branches that hold you back, to be present enough to protect and nourish your roots. I also challenge you to be resilient enough to stand tall like the baobab tree. Be strong enough to get up every time you fall. Be forgiving enough to forget the last mistake that you made. Embrace your beautiful self and love yourself the way that you are. May those that have come before us and those that are nudging forward and stepping into leadership today continue to help us to have all these qualities that we all need to get where we need to go. Thank you all so much.